I'm Chris Carter. This is the Locked On Steelers podcast, and today I want to talk to you about Justin Fields and his throwing mechanics and what the Steelers are going to try to do to help him become a more consistent passer. That and ranking the positions on the Steelers roster, all here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things of the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find the show in your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of your daily Monday through Friday episodes, as well as our bonus content. Thank you for making us your first listen every day, because we're your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms and conditions apply. All right, Steelers fans, hope you had a great weekend. I did, and now we're back. And I wanted to get into a few things here. We are down to I believe is actually the last full week where we don't have a Steelers training camp practice to worry about. So with that, we are going to try to get through as many of your questions as possible that have been piling up, and there have been a lot of them. And as always, if you want to get your question on the show and you have something to ask, you just call into the show at 412-223-6644, and we'll try to get your question on the show as soon as possible. It's 412-223-6644. Leave your name, where you're from, and keep your question under a minute. Today's question delves back into the quarterback situation, but not Russell Wilson. We've talked a lot about him. There's a lot of people wondering about the future of Justin Fields and what he needs to do if he's eventually going to be the guy in Pittsburgh. And well, Joe from Long Island had a question about his mechanics. Here's Joe.
Hey, Chris. This is Joe from Long Island, New York. Hey, I had a question about Justin Fields. We've been hearing that he's got problems with his throwing mechanics. I was wondering a couple things about that. Who's been working with him? Has there been any tangible evidence of any improvement that we've seen in the limited snaps that he's been getting? And really, why wasn't this addressed prior to becoming a Steeler, or was it? It just didn't take. So anyway, long-time listener, love the show. Thanks for taking my call. Hopefully I get on the air. If not, all good. Love you guys. Bye.
Thank you, Joe, for your question. As always, just like Joe, 412-223-6644. Leave your name, where you're from, and keep your question under a minute. Joe, I'm glad you brought this up, because this is something that is going to be something that we watch very closely in training camp, and that we probably talk a lot about over the next month or so as we get to see Justin Fields get to work with the Steelers more and more throughout training camp, and then eventually the preseason. So let's get into a few things. One, we have not seen nearly enough of what Justin Fields has been working to improve. We've seen that he's going to do that, but minicamp and OTAs and minicamp is just not nearly enough to assess anything like that, at least in my opinion. Maybe some people think that they can discern that. To me, even if you do show progress there, I do not care. I want to see you do it in training camp, and then if you do it in training camp, I want to see you do it in preseason, and if you do it in preseason, I want to see you do it in the regular season. It's a step-by-step process, and anytime that we talk about this and we say, hey, be excited for this step, like when we talked about last year, and even last year when the Steelers did really well in the preseason, I said, hey, this is exciting. They got to do it in the regular season, but they're doing it now, and that's better than not doing it now, right? So this is what's going to be a several steps long process of Justin Fields and evaluating where he's at. And again, remember, he's not going to be the starting quarterback to start the season. That he probably only is going to get a chance to start a quarterback if A, Russell Wilson gets hurt, or if B, Russell Wilson's so bad that they have to put in Justin Fields. So a few different things have to happen there, but let's focus on what Justin Fields can work on. First of all, and second of all, we talked about, that situation that we're not going to see that just yet. The person who's going to work with him most closely isn't even Arthur Smith. It's Tom Arth, the new quarterbacks coach that they hired this past season. And we did talk to Justin Fields about that. And he did talk about working with Tom Arth and what they're working on. But one thing Justin Fields told us, and if you remember the interview that we did with him back in OTAs, he talked about hey, is kind of told to just do what I do, get back to my style of game. And which kind of indicated to us that the Bears were having him do things that were outside of what he felt were the natural parts of his game and the natural part of his throwing abilities. And I think what's happening right now from the Steelers is what they're trying to do is they're trying to assess, hey, what does Justin Fields feel like what does he do when he's doing what he wants to do? What is his process? What does it look like? Now let's try to reform that. Let's try to strip away whatever problems he had in Chicago. And listen, if you look at his passing numbers in Chicago, he went from 58.9 completion rate as a rookie, 60.4 after that, 61.4 his best completion rate in 2023 during that time. His passer rating also went up each and every year, but at the end of it, in last year, he had an 86.3 passer rating. You're going to want more than that if you're the Steelers, of course. But I think what the Steelers are going to try to do, they're going to try to let him shake off whatever things that he didn't like about Chicago, and they're going to embrace him themselves. They're going to bring him into their system and say, hey, we see how you play. All right, now that we've studied you, now that we've seen you in OTAs and mini camp, and then eventually they'll see him in training camp, they're going to say, hey, these are the things we want you to shore up. Now, you're probably wondering, okay, what specific mechanics can be worked upon here? Well, there's several different things. One, there's your footwork and where you're placing your feet as you're setting up your throw, when you're getting into your stance, when you're dropping back, when you're setting up in your drop back, when you're standing up and you're surveying the field, how you step into your throw. There's also your throwing motion. There's a lot of people that will have a bigger throwing motion where they cock it back to get more power and they use more movement. Traditionally, you don't want a bigger throwing motion. You want a tight throwing motion where it's bang, bang. It's quick action, so that the amount of muscle memory that you need to maintain your accuracy is not as much as if you were to bring it all the way back and bring it all the way forward. It's basic things like that the Steelers are going to try and work with Justin Fields to make a consistent part of his game. And that's where Tom Arth, I think, is going to be tasked with the biggest things. And Tom Arth is a younger football mind, so he's going to be able to dice things down and break things down for him and say, hey, this is what's needed from you if you're going to become a starter and you're going to be the guy. And I think that's going to be good for Justin Fields because, again, the pressure won't be on him to figure it out while he's figuring out every opponent the Steelers have this year. That's what Russell Wilson's job is. But if Justin Fields can improve those mechanics, improve how he works in the field, get more comfortable in these new mechanics to tighten his accuracy up, and I think that's a big part of this is when you start making that throwing motion more consistent, both from your footwork to your drive to your arm throw to your follow through, and you're starting to do that while you're understanding the new offense that you're in, that's when it starts to come together and you become a more consistent quarterback. And consistency will be the key for Justin Fields if he wants to become a franchise quarterback, especially in Pittsburgh. So all that to say, I do think that this is going to be something that's ongoing. I don't think it's going to be something that gets resolved very soon, but it's going to be something fun to watch. And if you get to come to training camp and you get to watch what goes on at training camp, I think that'll be one of the things that we all kind of pay a close attention to and see how accurate is Justin Fields, how consistent is Justin Fields. And if you remember, we had on Mark Caboli over the past month talking about what we saw at OTAs. There were some really great throws we saw from Justin Fields in OTAs and minicamp. There were also some not great throws. And I think that's the problem with Justin Fields is that he has the potential to make some laser-like throws. But part of the problem is I think he tries to make a lot of laser-like throws when sometimes it takes a little bit of touch. And it's about learning how to adjust a consistent throwing motion and throwing pattern, but again, from your feet to your arms to your drive and how you're following through all of those, and to get it the pass it in different ways. How, when is it time to use a laser? When is it time to loft the ball? And all those factors will play into how he throws the ball, how he plays quarterback, and what the Steelers get out of him in that department. And again, it comes down to his personal work. It comes down to Tom Arth working with him, and it comes down to what the Steelers want to see better in his mechanics and how he embraces the challenge of getting there. But it's a good question to ask what he's going to work on. It's going to be something that we keep a close eye on here on Locked On Steelers. I guarantee you we're going to be talking about what we're seeing in training camp. How is he doing in 7 shots? How is he doing in 11-on-11s, 7-on-7s? And then once we get to the preseason, how is he doing there? What's he looking like? Is he throwing well? Is he looking comfortable? Is he making quick reads? That's the other part of this, is that when you get that motion down, now you have to incorporate that motion into how well you process the game, not just where your teammates are, but where defenses are and how that co-aligns with what you're trying to do on offense. It's why it's such a difficult game. It's why it's such an amazing sport sports to watch that there's all these factors that have to get taken into account. But I think right now the Steelers have the benefit with Justin Fields that he doesn't have to be the starter right away. And you have a whole offseason that you've been working with him now. Keep working with him. See what he does in training camp. If he makes progress there, great. If not, well, then you go back to the drawing board next year. But this is why I think it's really good for Justin Fields to have a chance to take a break, strip things down, go back to the basics, and then the Steelers can figure out, hey, this is what is good, what isn't good about your natural game. Let's implement that as best we can into this offense and see how good you can get as you keep applying yourself. Because if there's one thing that's really, I think that's really on Justin Fields' side, is I think a lot of people will credit him with being a hard worker and a guy who's willing to not just take on the work, but embrace the work to become a better quarterback, which is something the Steelers absolutely need if he's going to end up being that guy someday. When we come back, I want to take more of your questions, and this next question will guide us through all the different position groups on the team. We'll do that next here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. But first, I want to remind you this show is brought to you by Game Time. Game Time is the app you can download right on your phone right now to get tickets to any events, whether it's sports, music, comedy, theater, anything near you. Game Time most likely had. You can download the app or go to the website, gametime.co. With it being baseball season, there's no better place to get baseball tickets than to go on the Game Time app right now. Whether it's for the All-Star game going down, or if you want to just catch ball games when all the teams return to their home ball stadiums, it's going to be awesome. And Game Time is the best place to get it. Whether you're in Pittsburgh and you want to see Paul Skeens pitch on the mound for the Pirates, or you're in Los Angeles and want to see Shohei Ohtani be a world sensation for the Dodgers, Game Time can get you tickets wherever you want to go. And Game Time is also a fast and easy way to buy tickets even up to the last minute, when you can save up to 60% off buying tickets up to the last minute for all your different events. Plus, the Game Time best price guarantee means you always get the best price. If you find tickets in the same section of row for less somewhere else, Game Time will credit you 110% of the price of the difference of those prices. Snag the tickets without the stress with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase, or go to their website, gametime.co. Terms and conditions apply. Create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. We're back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. We wrapped up our topic there on Justin Fields and his mechanics and things that we'll be looking at when we thank you, Joe. But this next call comes from another part of the country. Again, Steelers Nation spans far and wide. We just had a call from Long Island, New York. Now we go to Omaha, Nebraska. Omaha! Variant, take it away.
Hey, Chris. This is Variant in Omaha, Nebraska. Lifelong Steelers fan. Really excited about the upcoming season. But first, just wanted to say I love the show. Really appreciate your guests and everyone that you have on, all the insight that you provide. My question is, with OTAs and minicamp complete, as we move into training camp, what is the position group that you are most confident about? And then what position group gives you the most concern, where we might need to make a move or two to get things solidified as we move into training camp? Thanks again. Love the show. Keep up the great work. Have a good day.
Thank you for the question, Varian. I appreciate the question. Again, 412-223-6644 to get your question on the air, just like Varian and Joe have today. So I'm going to do you one better, Varian. I'm not just going to name the most concerned and the most confident. I'm going to go ranking them from concerned to being confident, and say where the kind of line is where it breaks off about concern and confidence, because it's not like there's a black or white scale here. It's not like it's, definitely concerned and definitely confident for every single group. There's ranges for these things. And actually what's I think is really good for the Steelers is there are more positions groups on this team that I can say I think I'm more confident in the players in the roster than there are groups that I'm concerned about. But let's start with the concern. Let's start with the bottom and we'll work our way up to the top. Agreeably, also, we're throwing out special teams. We're not considering special teams. It's another day. We'll deal with that. We'll deal with that when we deal with that. Agreeably, I think all of you know what the first answer is going to be when it comes to the most concerning part of the roster. And that's, of course, wide receiver. Now, at wide receiver, I think there's going to be some interesting parts there that could be solved. We could see the Steelers get some help at wide receiver too if Calvin Austin steps up. Excuse me as I take a sip of water. But we could see Roman Wilson step up. We could see Van Jefferson step up. There's all these guys that could step up, but the problem is they're all question marks. None of this is solidified. None of this is guaranteed. And I think that's where the biggest concern should come about this group is that George Pickens is the one guy that you're most confident in. And you need George Pickens to not only continue to improve his game, but also be more of a leader than he has been in what you've seen from him in the past. And again, it's not like he's the complete bad apple, but admittedly, he's had some not great moments with the media and he's had some not great moments on the field. But I also think there's potential for him to get there. But still, if you're talking about concern and a position group that probably needs a second spot, wide receiver, that's my top concern spot. And I think that's an interesting place to be if you're the Steelers with wide receiver has been a strength of theirs for so long when it comes to drafting talent at wide receiver. And now you're at this point where you kind of need some of those draft picks to pay off rather quickly. And I think that's why they're my most concerned group right now for the Steelers roster. My second most concerned group is actually the group that's going to be working against the wide receivers, and that's the cornerbacks. And I say the cornerbacks next most concerned. And this is kind of also where I was talking about where I said, like, it's not black or white. It's not like the corners are completely terrible or anything like that. But I think Joey Porter Jr. is going to be in a really good spot. I think that Dante Jackson could be a really solid number 2. We just don't know a lot about the secondary. We haven't seen Dante Jackson play for the Steelers yet. We haven't seen who's going to even be the slot corner yet. And I think that uncertainty is why I put them down there in the concern department, because let's say that there is a big opportunity for the Steelers to kind of get a good slot corner in there, even if they get a guy that fits right in, you got to see it happen first. And I think that's where at cornerback, there's still some serious questions. Joey Porter Jr., I think a lot of people are confident about him, but it's still, can he take the year 2 leap? That's where I think that there's legitimate questions about the cornerback room. And so it's the concern is more so about the unknown factors of the room than it is the known bad factors of the room. And I think that is actually a much better situation than the Steelers have had for years, because how many times have you gone into a season and you're just like, well, that guy's just not going to be good. And I mean, like that, you could probably name some players right now. You're not for your least favorite Steelers who are playing in positions that you were hoping that they didn't have to play it that much longer. I think that there's a lot less of that on the team this year. Now, at the end of the season, sure, there's probably going to be players that you think of that after the fact. But heading into the season, I think if you look at corner, there's prospective players who can step up and be in the right spots. There's reasons to have hope that this group can figure it out. And I think that that's another really important part there. And again, it's still in the concern pile as far as, second most concerning group on the roster right now, but it could easily rise up to one of the best one if Dante Jackson does well. And if Cameron Sutton comes back after his 8-game suspension does well, and especially if Beanie Bishop or someone else steps in and does well. So there's a lot of different options there. I think cornerback is that second one. And my third most concerning group, and this is where I think the line starts to break from concern to confidence, because there's concern about the quarterback position, and not because I think that Russell Wilson's going to play poorly or Justin Fields is going to play poorly, but it's concern because you're in a whole new offense, you have whole new quarterbacks, and you're trying to adjust to a lot there, and so that is concerning. Now, am I confident that Russell Wilson can figure it out and be productive? Yeah, sure. I'm confident that he can do that for the Pittsburgh Steelers, but it's going to be another question mark. And that's where I kind of rest on how I evaluate position groups going into seasons is who are the checks? Like who are the satisfactory players? Who are the check pluses? Who are the outstanding players? Who are the guys that you're developing there? And then who are the duds? Who are the guys that aren't pulling their own weight? That's where I look at guys and their progress. And I think that when it comes to the quarterback position, if Russell Wilson and Justin Fields, or if just one of those guys is doing their job well enough that that the quarterback position isn't liability, well then they don't got to worry about it. They're doing their jobs, and they're not a concern. They're a confidence point. But again, I just named 3 position groups. I'll tell you right now, the other, what's this? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. The other 7 position groups on this team, I feel confident about. And I think that's a very good sign for the Steelers, because again, the prospect of these other groups, you got Russell Wilson and Justin Fields. They're unknown factors in how they play with the Steelers. You're not doomed to them just being bad because they've been around forever and they have to be bad. The same thing goes at cornerback with guys like Cameron Sutton, Dante Jackson, Beanie Bishop, all the prospects there. The same thing goes at wide receiver with guys like Roman Wilson, Calvin Austin. There's a lot of hope there, as well as a baseline foundation for someone to lead each of those groups, whether it's George Pickens, whether it's Joey Porter Jr., or whether it's Russell Wilson. I think that's really good potential there. But again, if I was to rank most concerned, those are my top 3. But most confident, that's where it starts to get really interesting. And again, why I think it's a very good sign of where the Steelers team is heading into training camp. We'll talk more about that and finish out which units I'm most confident about on the Steelers roster. That next here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. But first, I want to remind you, this show is brought to you by and sponsored by BetterHelp Therapy Online. Do you ever get caught up comparing yourself to other people and the lives you see online? Do you ever feel caught up in social media and think someone else's life looks so perfect compared to yours? Chances are they're probably not. And the best way to live your life is to focus on the things that you want that are right in front of you. But how do you block out all that noise and focus on yourself? Well, that's where good therapy can be a tool to help you get there. Because sometimes it just takes a professional to help you refocus on what matters most in your life. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp Therapy a try. BetterHelp knows life can be busy and stressful, so it's designed to be suitable for your schedule. All you have to do is fill out a brief questionnaire, and you'll get matched with a licensed therapist. And then you can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge after you sign up. Learn to make time for what makes you happy with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/lockedon to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon. We're back here in the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter. We are wrapping up our answering of I believe it was Varian's question out of Omaha, Nebraska, about which of the most confident and most concerned position groups on the Steelers roster do I look at it. So let's go up there. I said from the bottom to the top, most concerning is wide receiver. Next is cornerback, because we still don't know who's going to start in the slot. You don't know what's going on with Cam Sutton. Or, well, you do know what's going on with Cam Sutton, but you don't know what's going to go on with that, and you guys still got to see Dante Jackson in uniform. Quarterback came after that because they're all new quarterbacks, and you just need to see how they work and how they're going to be in the new system. But let's go after that, because guess what? Every group that I'm about to say after this point, I'm more confident than concerned in. And the next group up, and this will probably tell you how confident I feel about some of these groups coming up this year, but the next group is tight ends. Now, you're probably sitting here saying, wait a second, you mean the tight ends that are extremely deep? That's your fourth most concerned? And yeah. And it's less about the concern. It's more so about how confident I feel about some of these other position groups. Pat Freiermuth, Darnell Washington, Connor Hayward, I think they're going to be really good contributors to this offense. But as far as being the catalysts of the offense, as far as being the guys that take over the most, I don't think that they'll be that, but I'm still more confident than concerned about that group. And I think it's a really good sign that, again, that's they're on the list where they are, because right after them is offensive line. Now, offensive line has a bunch of unknowns as well, because we still don't know what's going to happen with offensive tackle, but the Steelers have invested highly in it. And even with just the initial investment of Broderick Jones last year, you saw when he became a starter, they went from being one of the lesser running teams in the NFL to the second best running team in the NFL in the second half of the season. That's where I think you'll see. I think that's where I think you'll see a lot of progress in this team. And again, That's the fifth most concerning, quote unquote, group on this roster is the offensive line. And I think it's a really good sign if that is because, a few years ago, they were the most concerning. They were giving up pressures all the time. They weren't able to run block. It was terrible. It was disgusting. But now that's gone. And I think there's a lot of hope and upside for guys figuring it out. And that's because you got a guy like Broderick Jones. You got a guy like Troy Faltani. You got a guy like Zach Frazier. You even have Mason McCormick. So there's a lot of things that I think work in the Steelers' favor in the offensive line there. Next up after the offensive line when it comes to confidence, right after them is the other side of the ball. It's the defensive line. Now, defensive line would be higher if we knew that Cam Hayward, was going to be 100% the whole season, which, nobody can fully be, especially at his age. But I keep it up there because Keanu Benton is a problem. And I think that he's gaining confidence in himself. And I think that Larry Ogunjobi can still be a solid vet. And I think that between the three of those guys, Pittsburgh's got some dudes that can work on the inside. So that's why I have them right above defensive linemen. But right after them, this is where I think that the Steelers can get really interesting with their strengths. Because right after them, I have inside linebackers. Now, inside linebackers, it's funny, you say, well, Chris, you said you don't know what this guy looks like, in the Steelers, and so you're picking the group with Patrick Queen. And I say, yeah, because you know what? Last year, we saw Quan Alexander, Cole Holcomb, and Landon Roberts come in, and the linebacker position was held down. Like it was good to go. Now you throw in Patrick Queen, who is one of the better linebackers in the NFL. You throw in Patrick Queen into this conversation, and then you added a Peyton Wilson on top of keeping a Landon Roberts, and who knows? Maybe they can go get Quan Alexander if they really want to. But the bottom line for me is that this linebacker group has a lot of talent. They can cover. They can play the run. I think that the inside linebackers, they're a really good spot. And if you're keeping track, they're the fourth most confident now. We're at the top four teams at this point here. So inside linebacker is my number 4 most confident unit. Number 3, I'm going to go with running back, particularly because Najee Harris and Jalen Warren, I think, are going to be a 1-2 punch that is revered for quite some time. I think Najee Harris can bring the thunder. I think that Jalen Warren can be the lightning. They can pound you, outrun you. It'll be a tough group, but I think that it'll be a really good thing for the Steelers offense to get these guys going together. So running back is 3rd. Next up is the second most confident, and I'm going to go with a position that you probably don't normally talk about, and that's safeties, because Minkah Fitzpatrick is still your ace safety back there, and now you got a guy like Deshaun Elliott helping you out, along with DeMonte Casey, and then you still have young guys like Ryan Watts, who's trying to learn the position, and he's going to be working behind all these guys. To me, I think the safety position, having that kind of strength, can be really helpful to defenses, and keeping everything together in the way that Minkah Fitzpatrick has over the past few years. So safety is my second most confident. And I don't think I need to tell you what's the most confident position anyone should be about the Pittsburgh Steelers, but I'll tell you anyways. It's the edge rushers. It's the outside linebackers, where TJ Watt and Alex Highsmith go, lay claim to all things in backfields. But I think that's where you have to say is the most confident group here, because you have the best defensive player in football on one side and one of the best edge rushers in football on the other side. And then you still got Nick Herbig coming off the bench. Now, granted, they could probably use a little bit more, depth or, get another guy behind Herbig. But at the same time, I'm looking at how this stacks up list-wise. We go from, again, most concerned to most confident. Wide receiver, corner, quarterback. Those are the only groups that I feel truly concerned about if I'm looking at this roster. Then I go from tight end to offensive line to defensive line to inside linebacker to running back to safety to outside linebacker. And I think that's a very interesting way to see how this group stacks up and how they'll change over this year, because I say this now, things could change very soon, but all of that is going to be interesting to see as we see things play out. And who knows, maybe I'll be more confident about certain groups or less confident about other groups as time goes on. in training camp. But there's a lot to evaluate. We'll do all of that here on the Locked On Steelers podcast as we get you closer to Steelers training camp starting next week. Thanks again for everyone who called into the show. Again, 412-223-6644 to get your question on the show. Leave your name, where you're from. Keep your question under a minute. We thank you for everyone for tuning into the Monday episode of the Locked On Steelers podcast. We're back more all week long on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube, talking about your Pittsburgh Steelers right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast.